My name is Haleema Bharoocha. I'm with South Asians for Black Lives. We're a program of an organization called Malika, which is a nonprofit. We started in January of this year, and we mostly run a social media page and are focused on education. And really want to kind of go over what is anti-Blackness and what are the 4 steps of dismantling anti-Blackness. One thing that I've noticed and realized is that a lot of South Asians in our community are unfortunately waking up right now in this moment and realizing in this moment that, wow, this is, anti-Black violence is happening and it's real and it's now only being recognized by some folks. I'm seeing a lot of messages being shared by South Asians like, wow, I'm shocked, right? And while this is, a valid reaction, it's also just telling of how much our community has not been involved in this movement and how much right now a lot of responses have been more so reactionary. And really at South Asians for Black Lives, we've been thinking about, yes, not only meeting this moment, responding to this moment, supporting the Black Lives Matter movement in this moment, but also thinking about what is our commitment to this work in the next year, right? In the next few months. Are we going to be here years from now? Because dismantling 400 plus years of oppression, of systematic oppression, is going to take a long-term commitment. So I just wanted to kind of start with that, urging us all to think about, while we're responding to this moment, while we're, while some of us are just realizing that anti-Black violence is an issue, we also need to think about what is our long-term commitment. So just to share a little bit about the overview, like what is anti-Blackness? The way that we've defined it is practice and underlying belief that Blackness, its history, rich culture, is something to be denied, resented, belittled, oppressed, and hated. And we've seen this in our own community, in the South Asian community, taken many, many forms, right? For example, upholding the model minority myth, which is used to pit our community against other communities of color. We use as a racial wedge almost. And it gives us a false sense of superiority, of acceptance by white society, which is completely not true. And it also forces this idea of who is a good model minority and who, kind of a category of who's deserving and undeserving. And that is something that we continue to uphold, to benefit from, and to use to further our own privileges and benefits. We've also seen it in the way that colorism, for example, has been perpetuated and upheld, right? According to The Guardian, 61% of women in India use skin lightening cream. So there's just a lot of different ways that we're seeing anti-Blackness within the South Asian community. And right now, I think one of the most common ways that we've seen it show up is the resentment almost towards the Black Lives Matter movement, or towards the progress for Black lives, where we're seeing South Asians who are saying things like, well, what about my community, right? What about my experiences? And while it is valid, right, like we've all, in some degree as people of color, gone through different forms of oppression, may have experienced racism, right? But this is not the moment for us to say, let me share my experience with racism, or to try to compare that experience with that of anti-Black oppression and violence. And so we really want to be critical in the way that we're responding, right? Some of these responses may be coming from good intention, it may be coming from a good place, but we really have to be thinking about the impact, as well as asking ourselves, what is the outcome of what we're saying and how we're responding, who is it centering, before we act. So that's just something that I wanted to share and something that's been on my mind, and really thinking about that. And the 4 different stages essentially that we wanted to center around combating anti-Blackness. And this, by the way, is from the Anti-Racism Starter Toolkit for anyone who's interested in learning more. So the first step is awareness. You have to first become aware of anti-Black racism, acknowledge that it exists within your community and yourself before you can actually address it. The second part is education. This part I think is really important, because sometimes we want to jump right to action, right? Once we are aware, we're like, we want to do something. But without the education step, sometimes that intention, while it's great, can have a negative impact and actually harm folks. So we want to be careful about what kind of allyship, what kind of solidarity we want to engage in. So the second step is education when it comes to dismantling anti-Blackness. This requires a lot of us educating ourselves, not only on our own history, but the history of anti-Blackness in the United States and wherever you may be, and also seeking anti-racism resources. Something that we're really inspired by and something that we're guided by is a quote from prison abolitionist Angela Davis, who said, it's not enough to be non-racist in a racist society, you have to be anti-racist. And I'm paraphrasing, that's not the full quote, but that's the direction of where she was going, that you have to actively be anti-racist. And I would really recommend checking out Dr. Ibram Kendi, who actually has a book called How to Be Anti-Racist. It's a great starting point for those of us who are thinking about what is that, what is the way that we can actively engage in anti-racism this is a practice that has to happen constantly. You know, it's not just one book, one webinar, one event, but it's actually an ongoing process of unlearning, because we're living in a society that is inherently anti-Black. And so that means even if we thought that we did all our work and all of that, we still need to continue constantly unlearning and relearning. And then the third step to dismantling anti-Blackness. Sorry, did you want to say something?
No. So I want to make sure that we can get all of the stuff that you just mentioned. You'll send it to me and we will post all of the stuff up, because I want everybody to be able to have the resources that you're so amazingly telling everybody about.
Yes, I'm sorry that I'm speaking so fast. I can definitely slow down, but I also want to be mindful of time. So the third step of combating anti-Blackness is self-interrogation. And this is when we can really take the knowledge that we have learned in terms of the awareness, in terms of the education, and apply it to ourselves, right? We have to first be accountable to the ways that we've been complicit in upholding anti-Blackness, the moments where we've witnessed it and we've been silent to it, right? Whether it was in our own family, in our workplace, or whether we ourselves were the ones that perpetuated it. And so that step around self-interrogation can look like, journal reflections. And on our Instagram page, South Asians for Black Lives, we're posting journal reflections, questions that you can write on, right? Because we have to really sit down and sit with it. And it can be uncomfortable to look into yourself and say, these were the moments where I actively participated in anti-Blackness, or where I saw it and I said nothing, right? So we actually have to look into our own history, like even looking at a broader level at the South Asian history. We look at Bhagat Singh, folks like him who perpetuated anti-Blackness at a deep level. So we have to be accountable and responsible for all these parts of our own community, ourselves, our families, and be able to recognize and identify this. And even for myself, when I've sat down to interrogate, what are the moments where I have been complicit in anti-Blackness, or where I was perpetuating anti-Blackness? It was an uncomfortable process, but it allowed me in the long run, when I had that thought in my mind that I was like, okay, this is actually anti-Black language, or this is something that I need to speak up about. It helped me build that awareness in myself. And then finally, the last stage of combating anti-Blackness is community action. So once we build our awareness, once we educate ourselves, once we do the self-reflection and that interrogation of our own community, we can finally be ready to build up to that action where we're reaching out to our community, we're building relationships with organizations to actually make systematic change, right? Because there's two levels of anti-Blackness. The first one is the interpersonal level, where it's something within our own community, where it's within ourselves, and then there is the more systematic level where we're seeing this on structures, and that's where we need things like policy and advocacy to happen, right? That's where we need elected officials, that's where we need to vote. So those are the 4 different stages of combating anti-Blackness, and I really urge everyone who's here, as much as we want to respond immediately, we should also be intentional in the way that we're doing so, and make sure that we're mapping back to, in the way that I'm responding, is this going to support the movement for Black lives? And before I hop off, I just want everyone to pull their phones out, and I want you to text ActionNow to 90975. ActionNow to 90975. And this will give you live text updates from the movement for Black lives. There's also going to be an event next Friday, and you can check it out on our Instagram that we'll be posting in partnership with Equality Labs and a number of other organizations called South Asians for the Defense of Black Lives, where we'll be continuing this conversation. Just want to quickly plug that if folks want us to boost anything, whether it's from Black-led organizations or South Asians organizing stuff, feel free to DM us on Instagram, and we'll be happy to boost it.